In this video, I will walk you through some of my process to design posters. To start, we use a grid. I have a grid guide with templates, and a link to that is in the description in case you're curious. The grid I will use in this video is also from this guide. For my grids in Illustrator, I always place it on an A4 artboard. Then I add it as a new layer on top and then lock the layer. This way you always see the grid, but it won't move. And you can also turn it on and off, which is nice if you want to just see your design. And when making and choosing the grid, make sure to leave enough space for the margins and also for the gutter, which is in between the fields. This makes sure that the design can breathe and has enough space in between. It doesn't look cluttered, but more organized. And I usually go for a 6x5 grid like the one here. It's very easy to use. It has a lot of potential for lots of text and also lots of images. It's very convenient. And now let's get designing. So these posters were almost all inspired by music that I came across with, that I listened to. As you can see in my designs, I like to go for contrast. So that's contrast between size, color, thickness, white space, etc. I think it allows the design to have more impact, but it's always like a midway, not too much of one thing. Just keep it simple. And for posters like this, it's amazing to have a grid. I cannot go without it because you can really align all the elements really well, and it looks more organized, and the design is more intentional because you actually thought about where you're placing all the elements on the grid, and it really shows in the quality of the design. And in my design process, after placing the grid, I always create the bigger parts first. So I generally have an idea where I want to put some bigger parts of the poster, and I place that first and then work around it, and then adding the other elements around. Since this is the big part, it needs to be the focal point, and it needs to look visually appealing and interesting. So I like to play a bit with the tracking and the justification for the text. I feel it can help the designs look more interesting and intriguing, especially since it's the focal point. But with this, always be careful that the legibility needs to always be preserved. For this specific poster, I had the idea of adding in a barking dog. I think it makes like a nice impact. It looks a bit rough, and it's a nice graphic element that can make a simple poster look really interesting. So I created a silhouette for this to make it a vector using the image trace option in Illustrator, and I made some adjustments to make sure that the image looked the way that I wanted. But there was a lot happening around, so I had to clean up a lot after, and I did that using the eraser tool. You can easily just remove some of the shapes that you don't need. This whole process actually looks very satisfying, sped up, but it was quite a pain to remove all of this. And then I also scale it a bit for more impact. and I'm really into this sort of beige orange colored palette these days, so I'm making the dog orange, and I think it looks quite nice. And I'm also placing the dog like in front of everything to make it really stand out. So for this last one, I'm focusing a bit on a more vintagey effect, so I'm adding a bunch of effects to this picture. When using lots of effects on pictures or text, I usually try to keep the rest of the poster very minimal, because the element with effects will take the center stage and be a focal point. So I think the rest of the elements should only complement it rather than like try to overshadow it, because then it gets crowded and feels like unintentional and very, it does the opposite of making an impact.